I know it's a pretty macabre topic for something different. Always talking about death and all these morbid things. But I mean, the reality is that if a client is faced with a terminally ill diagnosis and they need support, then as advisors, we are going to be called on to support them. And we really have to be able to know how to respond as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, so that if they're faced with these types of issues, the areas where we're helping with them doesn't take up any more airtime or energy for them than it needs to, and we can respond as swiftly as possible. So David is going to talk to us a little bit about the issues that come up in a financial planning context. And I'm particularly interested in this as an advisor because, sorry, as a lawyer, because often, you know, a client goes, great, I need to get my will done so I can get some peace of mind. One of the things that I need on my list is to know when to refer them off for further advice. So that's a very long introduction to David. Welcome to the live.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, look, it's something that's an interest and a passion of mine, helping clients with their financial planning in a gentle way when they're going through really a devastating diagnosis. It's just something that's come about through a mixture of experience and expertise. And I now run a specialist terminal illness financial planning service for the firm that I'm at, which is Vincent's in Brisbane and the Gold Coast. So yeah, so that's good. Obviously, financial planning and estate planning with a good lawyer is critical for a terminally ill client. And you know, the reason that a lawyer would refer a terminally ill client to a financial planner would be the same reason that a client would seek, any client would seek financial advice, which is really just helping them make good decisions, wise and informed decisions with their money. So there are some unique issues that come up for terminally ill clients, though, and that's really what we're seeking to help them with. Things like dealing with living expenses while they might have no income or reduced income, what to do about debts, mortgages, you know, that will need to be paid, how to claim their insurance, that will be a really important thing if they have it, and chasing down information about cover, old cover, you know, multiple superannuation funds, getting access to their super, and then longer term issues about where would you like an inheritance to go, how would you like to structure it. Those will be issues that a financial advisor and a lawyer would work very closely together. I think in an ideal scenario, issues around the best way to structure an inheritance, whether money should be inside super or outside super, you know, issues with relationships with children, occupational issues. It's a long list. So, you know, those sort of items will be dependent on the client, you know, which is important. So in my experience, clients don't suddenly gain amazing decision-making ability just because they've been given that terminal illness diagnosis. You might expect that. They've been given concrete and finite information about their future, but in my experience, it actually exacerbates poor decision-making. And I use a rule of thumb for clients, which I call the flamingo versus the ostrich, and that's just based on experiences that I've had with clients. Some clients tend to really wholeheartedly embrace their diagnosis and live as if they're going to die in the next week, and they spend too much money too quickly in this kind of flurry of bucket list type activity. And so dealing with those clients becomes talking to them about the outcomes of their decisions, ways of protecting wealth from their own decision making. You know, it's not for me to instruct a client exactly what to do, but to help them understand what the result of their decision making will be. I think about some clients that I had on the Gold Coast a few years ago who, did you ever watch that TV show called This Time Next Year with Carl Stevanovic?
No, I haven't seen it.
Haven't seen that? They had they would bring these people on with particular goals that they wanted to achieve, and then they would film them again in 12 months time, whether they'd you know, lost weight or got jobs or whatever they wanted to do. And with the magic of television, they would exit through one door and then come back through the other door. And a year had passed, and these clients of mine were on that show. They had become clients of mine because they'd won the lotto in prior years, and were on paper quite wealthy. But Tracy had been given a terminally ill diagnosis because of cancer, which it invariably is. And when that happened, she embarked on this spending spree of trips and holiday home renovations and cruises and cooking classes, all sorts of things. Very generous and giving and enjoying that time for both of her and her husband and their family, you know, not working and traveling and doing things that they'd always wanted to do. But the result was that they exhausted all of their funds. And so were left with very little from their previous winnings and their insurance payouts as well too. So yeah, so that's the downside to that kind of decision making. The opposite is what I call the ostrich, which is clients who just ignore their diagnosis. And I've seen this as well with clients who don't really have a tendency towards making good financial decisions or any decisions. And when they're given a terminal diagnosis, the way that they want to approach their finances and their decision making and their care is to ignore it entirely because of feelings of admitting defeat or giving up or not wanting to talk about negative things. And that can create issues in the opposite direction because they have resources, have decisions to make, but just don't want to even go there and don't want to discuss their mortality. And so that leaves the family with a big conflict because they want to respect the wishes of the person that's terminally ill and how they want to approach their treatment and diagnosis. But it leaves a big mess afterwards because they haven't dealt with their banking, they haven't dealt with their estate planning, they haven't dealt with their expenses and their wishes, funeral arrangements, all sorts of things that need to be talked about. A financial advisor who has experience in dealing with terminally ill clients will understand these kind of issues that just go beyond normal strategies. They're behavioural issues and bias issues, decision-making issues, and can really add a lot of value by helping to identify what clients' gaps are in their decision-making processes and help fill those gaps and bring families together, encourage conversations and start to point clients in the right direction for them.
Yeah, you raised a lot of really valuable examples there, David, and I can see how, the role of having a trusted advisor sort of steering and project managing some of the things that need to happen is just tremendously valuable while a client's going through that experience. And I know for me as an estate planning lawyer, a lot of the things you're mentioning, I'm just like, whoa, I'm totally out of my depth. Like I can get the will and the powers of attorney done and the super nominations, but even some of the strategy that goes behind that and understanding that things could be changing rapidly. If it was just to sort of, bang out a will, power of attorney as quickly as you can and leave it there, we wouldn't really be we'd be doing our client a disservice if we didn't suggest getting someone like yourself involved.
Yeah, I think in financial advice, there's a tendency towards advisors doing more of the estate planning work, and I think that's good. I think it's good that advisors have more estate planning understanding and more legal understanding. I don't think it's good for advisors to be doing estate planning work themselves, and I know that there are services out there where advisors can hold an estate planning discussion, produce a briefing paper, and even order wills online. I don't think that's great. I think that working together with the solicitor or lawyer is really, really important as an advisor. The advisor needs to have a really solid understanding and knowledge of estate planning issues and documents, but involve a specialist every time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the super and the insurance, because I understand that, that changes, the rules around that change once a client has a terminal illness in terms of, you know, strategy and decisions of, well, do we withdraw super early? Have we satisfied a condition of release? How does that impact the estate plan? How does that impact the tax? Do you want to sort of touch at a high level some of the nuances there?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, they'll have superannuation funds that have both an account balance and insurance component, two separate issues. If a person has been given a terminally ill diagnosis or a terminal diagnosis from their specialist, then and they're expected to pass away in the next 24 months, then they can, in most cases, claim on their insurance and withdraw their superannuation. So they suddenly, and I've seen they suddenly are actually quite wealthy, more wealthy than they've been before if they have a large life insurance component, which gets paid out and added to the superannuation balance, and then will either sit there if they don't need the money immediately, or if they need the funds for particular purposes, they can withdraw it. So there are subtleties, of course, with things like defined benefit schemes, but generally a person can access their superannuation and do with it as they will. And being diagnosed as terminally ill is a valid condition of release. It's one of many, and allows a person to withdraw their funds tax-free as well too. But it does create question marks around where is the best home for those funds. Super is a concessionally taxed environment. It's a very powerful vehicle from an estate planning point of view. There are limits on how much money you can have in super when you're passing it via a pension arrangement. But my preference really is to retain as much money in super as possible, just because of the good tax treatment that it gets and the certainty that you can provide with your beneficiary nominations, either directly to a dependent or via estate planning arrangements through a will. I'm a big fan of super. I think it's a really good environment to hold wealth, and you need to, I find myself having discussions with clients balancing immediate needs around school fees and renovations and repayment of debt versus trying to retain as much of the lump sum as possible beyond their immediate needs for the family, because they've invariably had a loss of earnings, and so we're going, that money is it really in terms of what they're going to be able to accumulate. So I just find myself having conversations about, okay, how much do you actually need right now? What can be preserved for your family, and then what is the best way to do that? And so that's a practical discussion, but there's also some complexity where you would definitely engage a lawyer to be talking about outcomes of certain decisions around beneficiary nominations, reversionary pension issues, what your children do, health issues, addictions, disabilities, just to about the way that inheritance is going to go through to the family.
Yeah, so true. And it's interesting because I look at it through the lens and I go, okay, well, on one hand, with the super, if we've got, say, no death benefit dependents for tax purposes, so, the super's to go to adult children or something, then a pre-death withdrawal under a condition of release, good idea. But then I don't think about, well, how are they actually going to keep that money and manage the cash flow of it? Or, are they going to blow it and they'll, the whole thing's done for no point? And then also look at, well, what's the dynamic, and have we got issues with a potential challenge? Is there a blended family? Trying to get our head around that really quickly. And is it better off in a super environment and relying on nominations, or are we better off or having it outside of the estate, or having it come through the estate? There's so many moving parts there. And another thing that I think is really valuable from a financial, like the role that you can play as a financial advisor, is sort of doing a projection of where the funds will go. And super is obviously part of that as well. I had a post-death testamentary trust job come up last year, and it was for a fellow who was terminally ill, and he had seen a lawyer, and they had put together a beautifully crafted testamentary trust will for him, and knowing he was terminally ill and he was leaving a younger wife with young children. But all of his assets were held as joint tenants in a family trust and in super with a binding nomination to the spouse. So there was actually, you know, like $20,000 or something that went under the will into the testamentary trust. Oh, we've lost David. That's all right. I'll keep chatting and we'll see if we can get him back on. I'll just send him a message. I'll keep the live going if you want to jump back on. So basically there was like hardly anything in the testamentary trust, which was a real shame because, you know, I just needed a tinkering with the superannuation and life insurance nominations. There was a couple of mil of wealth there, and then the surviving spouse with the two, you know, primary school age children would have had all those really nice asset protection and tax advantages of the testamentary trust. So having the financial advisor kind of overlay their review and strategy onto the estate planning strategy, the clients could have sort of projected and almost had a preliminary estate distribution calculation in place to see, well, where is this wealth going to go? Here we go. I'll bring David back on if I can. Where is this wealth going to go under the estate plan? And that just helps lay a practical element over the technical component for the estate plan, because as lawyers, you know, we can only draft the document as well as the information we're given. I'm just bringing David back in. Hi, David. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. We're having some technical difficulties on this end.
And I'll just tell everybody that the platform we're using seems a little bit unstable, so it's not David, David's tech skills. So I was just saying while you're off that having, you know, an advisor almost do like preliminary or dummy, you know, estate distribution calcs, so we can overlay practically what the money is, where the money is going to go, with the technical legal recommendation, I think is so valuable, because as lawyers we can only draft a will or an estate planning strategy that is as good as the financial information that we're fed. So having that collaboration, I think, is tremendously valuable, particularly when it comes to decisions like super and whether that should go into a testamentary trust directly to a beneficiary. What would the tax on that look like, you know, and then also how is this wealth going to be managed in the interim? It's quite a few like complicating factors, to be honest.
Yeah, the practical considerations are so important. And trying to think practically about the outcomes of your decision making and recommendations is really important too. The technical stuff, you know, there's large bodies of knowledge about technical outcomes of particular strategies, cashing out, recontribution, reversionary pensions, testamentary discretionary trusts. But, you know, so much of the value in advice and also the relationship with your solicitor is in non-traditional advice areas. So things like, how do you structure your bank accounts? Are you a secondary card holder on the main credit card that's going to be cancelled upon death? Thinking about what level of family support you have and that you need, government services, palliative care assessments, travel subsidies, talking to the GP about a care plan and counselling referrals for mental health, workplace entitlements, talking to your workplace about what's happened and what's available to you, bill support for utilities, thinking about important documents that you need to have together, putting together a pack for family, with title documents or asset ownership information, Medicare, insurance statements, superannuation statements. There's so much beyond just technical strategies that becomes really important for clients. Even things like what to do about social media. Facebook has a memorial feature. When a person passes away, on the presentation of a death certificate, then you can memorialize that person's Facebook account. And things like that are important. I'm still getting friend suggestions from a family member who passed away last year from Facebook. So thinking about practical considerations for the recommendations that you give is really important. Last year, I interviewed some of the families that I'd worked with, three different families, and put together a guide for clients for terminally ill financial planning. So it's not very technical. It's not meant to be for practitioners. It's really just for clients to introduce them to concepts that they need to think about, and areas where legal advice and financial advice can help them. And so much of those discussions was based on very practical things that they had never thought about, and became more and more important. Things like the need to get 20 to 30 copies of a death certificate, because every financial institution, every social media profile, every superannuation fund, they're all going to want a copy. So rather than getting 2 or 3, get heaps, get 20, get 30 copies, certify them all, do it all at once, and you'll find things a lot easier for the family. So it's sort of drifting into, thinking about things like that is sort of drifting into thinking about post-death. I find myself doing quite a lot of work around the time of the diagnosis for planning purposes, and then around or shortly after the death of the client on practical issues and practical supports. I've heard so many curious stories and interesting stories about things that family members had to deal with that they never would have thought of. I had one client who passed away early last year, and wanted his intention was to have his ashes returned to the UK and be buried over there. So the funeral home did not magnetise all the metal out of the ashes, and so the family had trouble at customs trying to get this urn with all this metal in it through customs, and there was a lot of concern at the time about that getting confiscated, because it doesn't look good on the scanner. So
I had no idea that was an issue.
Yes, it's an issue. If you're passing through airport customs, if you're carrying it with you in your checked luggage, which you have to do, you can't check it in. You need to know that the funeral home, when they've done the cremation, has properly magnetised all the metal out of the ashes. Otherwise, it'll be confiscated because it looks like a bomb.
Right. See, I mean, as you've just been speaking, I'm just like, yeah, it's like so many issues that I wouldn't have thought to guide a client on. Can we just backtrack a bit? So there were 2 things that really jumped out at me, and one is information for the executors, and I can imagine particularly where you've got a surviving spouse remaining who has to be the executor, and they've just, it's just overwhelming issue on top of overwhelming issue. Having, trying to collect as much information as you can now before someone passes away can be tremendously valuable, especially if we've got to, find information about cost bases and tax information, or, how are things sorted or, owned, or if we have to go and, like, we've got a family trustee that we need to do deeds of confirmation or anything like that, like sorting those issues out before someone dies can be so much easier than trying to set it all up after the fact. So again, having you in the background trying to work through all of the estate distribution calculations and planning and you know, notifications and getting like a checklist together, I think can be hugely valuable.
Yeah, those checklists, that is, I mean, that's the other side of it, is helping the family. There's a couple of good resources that are available. There's a booklet called I'm Dead Now What, which is just a little pack where you can put everything together, like important documents and wishes and intentions. Vincent's do an After You're Gone pack. So we do, it's really a checklist of important financial information that the terminally ill person and their family can collate into one place. Documents, intentions, prepaid funerals, wishes for the funeral, health information, Medicare, ownership, estate planning documents, just to have everything in one easy to locate place, or one central place, just to make things very simple, very easy for the you know, for the loved ones.
Another thing you mentioned is the superannuation recontribution strategy. So I'm not sure that everyone watching, particularly some of the lawyers, would know exactly what that is. So I was just wondering, firstly, I'll just do a shout out for people watching. If you've got questions for David, throw them up in the comments and we'll try to answer them. We have sort of gone over time, but we started a bit late, so there's still a bit more time for questions. So throw them in and we'll have a look. But in the meantime, David, do you want to just touch the high level? I know it's a complex concept, but just high level, like what the super contribution recontribution strategy is and why someone might need to think about it.
Yeah, so everybody's superannuation fund is made up of two main tax components: a tax-free component and a taxable component. The tax-free component will be your own contributions that have been made out of your own pocket, for which you didn't claim a tax deduction, so non-concessional contributions generally. And then the taxable component will be made up of employer contributions or concessional contributions and investment earnings across your lifetime. And so those two different tax components don't matter much whilst you're working, but if you have an inheritance or a superannuation balance being paid to a dependent, it starts to come to the fore. If that superannuation fund is being paid to a tax dependent, so a spouse or a minor child, then it goes to that person tax-free in entirety. But if you have a superannuation fund going to a non-tax dependent, which would include an adult child, it's still valid, but they're going to pay some tax on the proceeds, and it's going to be from that taxable component. And so the calculations to work out that tax can be a bit complicated, but suffice to say, it is preferential for a superannuation fund to have a higher percentage of tax-free component to minimise any tax paid by the receiving family members. And one of the ways to do that is this cash out and recontribution strategy, particularly for terminally ill clients. If they've met that condition of release, they have full access to their super. And so they can actually withdraw large lump sums from their superannuation funds and then make large contributions back in. Now, there are limits on how much you can contribute back into super, so you just need to be mindful of strategy. I'm doing one of these next month, actually. So we'll withdraw 400,000, 100,000 will go in June, and then 300,000 in July across those two financial years. And so that'll allow us to get 400,000 out and back in. Now, the contribution, because you're not claiming a tax deduction for it, it's a non-concessional contribution is the term, and that ends up in that tax-free component. So for that family, initially, the inheritance will go to the spouse, but presuming that thereafter it goes to her children, many years down the track, it will be, unless it goes through an estate planning vehicle, if it just goes directly from super to adult children, it will be beneficial for that family from a tax point of view to have a larger tax-free component in the superannuation fund. So it's not a strategy that you do all the time, but it's designed to give a better tax outcome for the family by working with, first of all, the terminally ill clients' access to their super and their ability to make large contributions back. So
thank you. You have explained a very difficult concept quite simply there. So again, another example of, for lawyers, we may be able to identify and say, well, maybe a recontribution strategy could be useful here, but particularly Barton's been adding some comments in as well about the complexity of, if you're making future contributions, a recontribution strategy could create issues down the track. That this is an area where, we might be able to suggest it, but you need specialist financial advice from a client perspective. They can't just run off and try to DIY their own recontribution strategy off a legal recommendation. But it is, I think, important for us lawyers to know that there are these strategies there, because they can be valuable to clients. And if there's less tax paid on the estate means more money for beneficiaries, and particularly where there could be blended families or potential challenges, that can make a huge difference. So, David, those were my two questions. Were there other points that you wanted to raise?
No, not really. I just wanted to talk, about why you would refer to an advisor, and that's really for that practical support and typical strategies or areas of advice that you would provide. The strategy stuff is reasonably well known amongst the advice community. It's the practical supports from someone who's dealt with terminally ill families, terminally ill clients and their families, and has a level of experience there. To just deal with things that you never would have thought of being issues. So yeah, it's a provision of compassionate, practical advice rather than amazing technical strategies that clients value the most. And yes, it is a little bit macabre to talk about death and dying all the time, so you need to be thinking about that. But it is profound, the impact that you can have on a client and their family, and very rewarding from a personal point of view. Obviously, it can be very emotional at times, but it's important work. It's not just product flogging, which my industry is renowned for. It's a way to provide good, proper advice to families in times of need, and do it in a compassionate and gentle way.
David, thank you for your generosity today. You've really demonstrated how much value I think you can add to guiding a client through something like this in their lifetime. And look, I really think as an accountant or a lawyer, if we are, receiving this news from our clients, one of the best things we can do is put them in touch with, yourself to get some of this stuff sorted, because it's so multifactorial. And some of these things, even just making sure there's a referral to the GP, supporting the family around the client who themselves has a diagnosis, and then making sure that we as lawyers have the information we need to do our part of the process as effectively as possible. I mean, you've just blown my mind with the number of things that you can help a client with. So thank you for your generosity today to guide us through that. We'll put your details in the live. Everyone should be able to connect with you if that comes up for their client. And are you happy for people to reach out to you directly if they want more information for their toolkit, or have a client where this is relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me, of course. And it's a real pleasure. I'm really happy for you to distribute my contact details. If people would like a copy of that client guide that I wrote last year and was published this year, we haven't promoted it widely because of the tone and the time. But if there are members of the group that would like access to that, it's available, so I can provide that as well.
Well, I think that's a great idea. If you want, you can send it to me and I'll put it up in the group, and I'll actually link it to this live if you're happy for us to do that, so that everyone, it doesn't matter, because this is recorded, so it doesn't matter when you're watching it, you'll have the access to the resource.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much, David. We'll be in touch in the chat. If you've got other questions and you're watching this after the event, just throw your questions up in the chat and David and I will do our best to answer them. Have a great afternoon and thanks again.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much.